We're not firing a broadside for this episode. By the time we'd finished recording our conversation about the mooch, he was already unemployed. Rather than risk the whole episode becoming so 5 minutes ago, we opted to release it as soon as possible. Thanks for understanding. Now, on with the show.
The sleep of reason brings forth monsters.
I'm a whiner, and I keep whining and whining until I win.
Maybe somebody will rise up.
We must not confuse dissent with disloyalty.
Welcome to Swing State, an aggressive, progressive, critical, and political podcast from the middle of the Midwest. Welcome back to Swing State. I'm Lewayne.
I'm AJ.
We've reached episode 25, and Donald Trump, unfortunately, is still president. Despite allegedly laundering money for the Russians, allegedly sexually assaulting models, and having a staff policy that apparently includes a revolving door. But to start with, we're going to talk about Trump's campaign rally at the National Boy Scout Jamboree, and his new official/unofficial policy regarding transgender military personnel. Boy Scouts and the U.S. military, two organizations that Trump clearly knows nothing about. For those of you who aren't familiar, the National Boy Scout Jamboree is a huge, huge event that takes place in Fort A.P. Hill, where Boy Scouts from, as one imagines, the entire nation get together for one large event. Most presidents, as far as I know, have either spoken there or done something while they're there just because the President of the United States is unofficially also the President of Boy Scouts of America. Trump's speech in front of the Scouts was, well, frankly, as I described it, a campaign speech. He basically talked about crowd sizes in a way that clearly was meant to be a joke and just didn't fly because he has no ability to tell a joke. He talked about draining the swamp. He talked about all the people in his cabinet that are Boy Scouts and how great they all are, except for Tom Price, who he was going to fire if he didn't get that damn healthcare vote taken care of. There was a variety of other additional shit in his speech that was beyond what is appropriate, even when talking to other people, let alone to a bunch of boys between the age of like 10 and 18. So for every moment he sort of touched on something related to Boy Scouts, he then went off on some other tangent, including some story about a yacht and this developer he knew and what sounded vaguely like a sex anecdote. It was a fucking mess.
It was a weird one. He even claimed at one point that, Barack Obama had never come to a Boy Scout Jamboree.
Which is true, kinda.
Yeah, well, technically. I mean, he got a big cheer from the audience, like, yeah, that fucking Obama never did anything for us. Well, it turns out Barack Obama actually sent this to the Boy Scout Jamboree.
Hello, everybody. I want to send my greetings to everyone taking part in the National Scout Jamboree at Fort A.P. Hill, and congratulate you on the 100th anniversary of the Boy Scouts of America. I hope you've all enjoyed this year's festivities. For a century, Scouts, just like you, have served your communities and your nation in ways both large and small. During World War II, Scouts played a vital role in supporting the war effort at home by running messages and selling war bonds. Some of our nation's greatest heroes have worn the Scout uniform, including 11 of the 12 men who have walked on the moon. And today, Scouts across the country continue the tradition of collecting food for those in need, improving our neighborhoods, and reaching out to those less fortunate. That service is worth celebrating, but there's still more to do. Even though we face a different set of challenges today than we did 100 years ago, they're no less important. And in the years ahead, we're going to depend on you, the next generation of leaders, to move America forward. So I hope that all of you will carry the lessons you've learned in scouting with you for the rest of your lives. And I hope that when you're called upon to help write the next great chapter in the American story, you will uphold the best of the scouting tradition and respond with enthusiasm, skill, and determination. Congratulations again on your first 100 years. I'm sure the next 100 will be even better.
I remember what it was like to have a real president. I'm old enough to remember.
Not only a real president, but one who, regardless of how you feel about his policies, sounded like a fucking president.
I have to admit I miss the guy. I wish we could have gotten another 8 years. I think we would have been a lot better off.
Anyway, As one can imagine, there was no shortage of apologies that were made after Trump's speech, including official ones from the Boy Scouts themselves as an organization and several other individual leaders on various things like Facebook. I was in Scouts from about 3rd grade through adulthood. So I went through Cub Scouts, Boy Scouts. I was also in an Explorer's Post. In fact, I helped found an Explorer's Post. And I was an adult leader for both the Boy Scouts and the Explorers. I have a little bit of experience with scouting. Now, I did not become an Eagle Scout. Well, I'll just go ahead and get that out there, too. So I'm not as impressive as some of the other douchebags in his cabinet. I'll admit that they've got me there. The thing that sort of caught me off guard about some of the apologies that were issued were the number of times the term apolitical was used to describe Boy Scouts. Now, if you know anything about the history of the Boy Scouts of America, it's not apolitical, especially if you were, I don't know, gay before about 2013. They had a policy that prohibited homosexual scouts and leaders. They eventually backed off the scout ban and allowed them in like 2013. A couple years later, they sort of finally admitted, yeah, okay, I guess the adults can come in too. They do not, however, as far as I know, have a policy that allows for atheists to participate in Boy Scouts, which would have been kind of a problem for me when I was a scout if that had been a policy anybody gave a shit about at the time.
Is that something that's like enforced? How would you know?
Literally, the only way you would know that would be if you actually said, look, I'm an atheist.
Oh, okay.
Or if you're one of the people like me who, when you said some of the various required rote things that you say in Scouts that involve God, you just sort of omit that part. Oh. You know, like how some people will do the Pledge of Allegiance and omit under God. I would do that when I had to do the Scout Oath, which is, you know, on my honor, I will do my best to do my duty to God and my country. I just sort of skip the God part. There's also in the Scout Law, which is like 12 attributes of a Scout. Scout is trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent.
Man, they got to you.
Yeah. Reverent is one of the last ones in there. And there is a bit about being morally straight within one of these as well.
Morally straight.
Right, but they were very clear to mention when I was a kid. That doesn't mean like straight, like not gay. We just mean like you're a good person.
I know, but it's funny to imagine it does.
Now, I'm not going to lie. The organization as a whole really does make a lot of difference in a lot of young men's lives. In the speech that Obama gave, you heard him mention 11 of the 12 astronauts that walked on the moon were Eagle Scouts. Eagle Scouts do shit. I mean, you don't just get to be an Eagle by loafing your way through, which is probably part of the reason why somebody like Trump has never participated in something like Boy Scouts. It actually requires you to work, and it requires you to volunteer your time and your effort. One of the final requirements of the Eagle is that you have to do a service project for your community that does not benefit you or your organization in any way.
If Trump ever did entertain the ideas of becoming an Eagle Scout, he probably erupted into flames when he read that part.
Now, one of the things I didn't mention when we were talking about the politics of Boy Scouts, until recently, like within, this year, transgender scouts were not allowed. But as of the beginning of this year, I think that there was a policy change. So they reversed essentially 100 years of policy and said, yeah, we'll go ahead and allow transgender scouts, which is a little different than the plan that Trump apparently has for the U.S. military. For those of you who also aren't aware, and I'm not sure how you're not, because Trump's tweets pretty much get sent everywhere. Trump tweeted a few days ago that the military's policy would be to not allow transgender personnel to participate in the military in any position, which came as a bit of a surprise to the Joint Chiefs, who didn't know shit about it and hadn't heard anything.
Okay, we just need to stop right there, because this concept popped into Trump's head at some point, probably late at night, because the fucker doesn't sleep. And then he just decides to tweet out a new policy. Do I have that right?
That's essentially
okay.
Yeah.
He just tweets it out, an official policy, and he is not consulted, informed, discussed, met with, or even hinted at to anybody in the Joint Chiefs or anyone down the chain of command who would be responsible for presumably purging the transgendered troops that are already serving.
Right. Well, that's actually one of the interesting elements. General Mattis, the guy who's been appointed to run the military, just extended research into the impact of the transgender population on the military. So the guy in charge of the military is still looking into the whole transgender thing with regard to the military. Now, this is an extension. That this had happened, and he's like, I need some more time. I need to spend a little more time looking at this. So even he, the closest he's come to knowing about any of this is going, I need to look into this a little. Wait, we're doing what?
So you could make an argument, what do you say, a philosophical or let's say a devil's advocate, that there is some negative effect of having an overabundance of transgendered persons serving in the military. That is a possibility.
I guess.
It's within the realm of reason. It doesn't sound likely to me, but I mean, let's just say for sake of argument, that's a possibility.
The quantity is not necessarily zero.
Right. But you have a study that has been going on for, I'm assuming, several months, if not years, and then you're extending that how much further?
I believe it was another 6 months.
Another 6 months. So you can't even wait for the data to come in? I bet Trump didn't even have a clue that this was happening.
I suspect not. And again, what difference is data to him?
Yeah, right. So there's a process in place to legitimately figure out if transgender people are having any impact whatsoever on the military.
It actually is a review of the U.S. military policy on transgender service members. So it's not even really specifically the impact. It's what does this just mean in general to have transgender personnel?
Sure. But what we know is there are transgendered people serving in the military today.
Currently, yes.
Our military doesn't appear to be any less functional than it used to be.
No.
We still have several 100,000 active duty troops, I think, at any given time. This pops into his head. It's just pure malice. It's, I'm having a bad time. I need to shift attention onto something else, some other group of people. I need to get the ire of the country up against them, a group that, let's admit, it's fairly easy to pick on from Trump's perspective. That's all this is in that case, based on what you're telling me.
Yes. In fact, here's the other thing about it. Now, I told you the Joint Chiefs had no idea what was going on. Probably the greatest sign of that was his current mouthpiece. What is it? Huckabee Sanders? Is that her name?
Sarah Huckabee Sanders.
Okay. She basically had a press conference in which she said there is no plan for implementing that. So not only is there not an official policy, which the Joint Chiefs were very clear to point out immediately, because they obviously got word, hey, we've got transgender personnel who are like, what's this mean for me? Nothing yet. Okay, we don't have any official policy. Go on about your business.
So it's kind of like the healthcare thing. It's just a big scare.
Yes.
Oh, we're going to pass it, but it's not really going to be the bill. We're not really passing it when we pass it. It's just sort of passing it. What is happening?
He doesn't have anything. I don't want to sidetrack on healthcare for very long, but in talking about the healthcare thing, that's their big thing. That's the one thing they've really been focused on. They still can't get anywhere with it. After how many attempts? 50 plus attempts during Obama's presidency, and how many attempts to get it through the House and Senate now? They can't get anywhere with it.
But the two are tied together in this way because during the point in time where the president should be working on what will amount to the hardest legislative fight he's probably ever likely to face, because it's on the issue of healthcare, which gets people's emotions a little hot.
Literally affects everybody.
In ordinary times, the president would have to focus 100% of his energy and attention on passing a piece of legislation that large and that impactful. And so what we have is a situation where while that process is going on, and it's going to take everything you have just to maybe move the ball a few more yards down the field, let alone end up with a final version that the House and Senate and the president and the country all agree on. But in the middle of that, you decide to attack a minority group in this country. To me, this is where we're starting to get... Well, no, actually, we're not starting. We're not starting anything. This has been going on forever. The stupidity of it is incomprehensible, and the country is hurting because of these actions. I don't know how else to put it. Between that one and then, going out and asking the police officers to, make sure you're plenty rough when you're putting people in the paddy wagon, we really are looking like just another tin pot dictatorship. A president attacking the rights of his own citizens, trying to erode protections even for police, which, by the way, that speech that he gave to the police and that injunction to use violence, that endangers the police as much as it endangers the people of the country. So all you cop supporters out there thinking you're doing something for the blue by supporting Trump, wake up, man.
I'm going to go back to something you said, because you're talking about attacking a minority, which in this case is transgender. One of the interesting things about that, though, is that this is a minority that exists within a group that Trump claims to support, that his supporters claim to support, and that the rest of us are expected to basically fillet at every opportunity because they're American heroes.
He stood in front of the country during the Republican National Convention.
This time, the terrorists targeted LGBTQ community. No good. And we're going to stop it. As your president, I will do everything in my power to protect our LGBTQ citizens.
I think, if anything, that shows a sign of his willingness to say pretty much anything. But here's the thing. And this goes back to what I said before. Both the Boy Scouts and the U.S. military are things that Trump has zero understanding of. He doesn't understand what being involved in Boy Scouts means, and he clearly doesn't understand what being involved in the military means with his 5 deferments for bone spurs. The one thing I can tell you is that if you're wounded and bleeding on the field, you're not going to give a shit about the genitals of the person who's dragging your ass to cover. If that person next to me, regardless of what they've got in their pants, met the qualifications to participate in that branch of the military, fucking A. I have zero problem with that. And that's actually one of the things I found sort of frustrating. The number of people I knew in the military whose response to this transgender thing was essentially, well, you know, military service isn't a right. I know it's not. It's something you have to fucking earn. And these fucking people earned it.
Right. If you're transgender serving in the military today,
you fucking earned it.
You're wearing the medals. You're wearing the decorations. You have the uniform.
You're wearing the fucking body armor and dragging the goddamn gun around.
Right.
You earned that. This is not about it being a right. And the number of fucking people who've been in the military who were posting shit showing soldiers in pink fucking uniforms and all of this emasculating bullshit, I was completely floored. You guys of all people know how important it is to trust the person next to you. How important the person next to you is to your survival. And you're going to just dismiss them out of hand because you don't like whether or not they've got a dick? It was essentially on the anniversary of the desegregation of the United States military that Trump made that fucking announcement.
It's so incompetent and so stupid at the same time. That's what's so, I guess, flummoxing about this era we live in, is that you can have somebody so nakedly dumb, but yet it's so serious because people's lives really are affected. And by the way, since we're talking about the military, I just want to go ahead and throw this in for you, ladies and gentlemen. Rest easy tonight because according to a Washington Post article, North Korea will be able to field a reliable nuclear-capable intercontinental ballistic missile as early as next year, U.S. officials have concluded in a confidential assessment that dramatically shrinks the timeline for when Pyongyang could strike North American cities with atomic weapons. So while we're all paying attention to Trump's transgender ban, while we're paying attention to the crap with the Boy Scouts, we are inching closer to an absolute disaster under his quote-unquote leadership. This is what we really need to talk about here, and this is the point, is that this is not what a leader does. A leader doesn't decide these idiotic things in the middle of the night and tweet about it without conferring with a single person. A leader looks at the data, makes a decision based upon the data,
even if it's the hard decision for whatever moral or party structure determines how they operate. A real leader can make a difficult fucking decision. Think about that for a minute now. We're talking about a nuclear-armed power potentially having the ability to reach us. Trump has never had a major crisis to deal with within his presidency. He hasn't had a September 11. He hasn't had the entire economy crash. He hasn't had to make any significant important decisions. He's made a bunch that have been important in that they've probably harmed people, but he hasn't had to make any real spur-of-the-moment leadership decisions.
His business career is a joke. It was a failure, and by the way, he never ran a corporation. This was a mom-and-pop enterprise where he could just bark orders at a subordinate and, hope everything turned out, and then Russian money flowed in when he needed cash. He's never had to deal with the chess match of playing against a country that we know very little about intelligence-wise because it's very difficult to get into North Korea, and what we do know is that their leader is possibly insane. You're talking about a very testy situation where you need the firmest of hands. You need a very, very skilled sailor to navigate these waters, and somebody who's not going to be baited and be cajoled into a response that can escalate and put us in a situation where things are getting out of hand. Unless something glorious happens on the Russia front here within the next year, we could be under Trump's quote-unquote leadership when this North Korean eventuality potentially happens. My point here isn't to scare anybody and to tell you that I think, the nuclear war is a likelihood. It's not, but this is not my idea of a stable situation on our end or on their end.
Well, again, try and imagine, regardless of your feelings about how W handled September 11th, try and imagine Trump in that same situation. A decision has to be made. We have to know what's going on. 3,000 people probably were killed all at once from a terrorist attack. How does he respond? Well, first you got to get him pried away from the television. But that's probably how he'd hear about it. But just think about that. Can you imagine Trump making any meaningful decision in the event of a crisis like that? Something that requires a real response.
And even if he does make a decision, does the execution of that decision bring about his intention? Or does it not? Because based on what I'm seeing, when Trump wants something like a policy or a bill or something like that, he goes about everything fucking back-asswards. It completely implodes, whether we're talking about healthcare or several of his executive orders. He doesn't run anything by anybody. And so if we're talking about a real crisis situation where people following the orders of the chain of command is very important, and this guy is going off the reservation tweeting, this is how disasters can happen.
And here's why the transgender military issue is so important to what you're talking about. Everybody makes a huge deal out of the president as the commander-in-chief of the military. Okay, got that. That's part of the job. But you have a commander-in-chief who made a policy decision without consulting anybody who actually knows anything about either policy or the military. So instead of doing what any normal leader would do and actually interacting with these people and saying, hey, I've got this issue, I really think this transgender thing is a problem and we need to do something about it, and then they could tell him, go fuck himself, it's stupid, then that would have been the chain of events. A good leader would have said, I have this, well, a good leader wouldn't have decided we're going to kick out a minority of our people, but let's just take that as a given, that for whatever reason, this particular leader has an issue with the transgender. He goes to the Joint Chiefs, he goes to Mattis and says, hey, I've got this thing. And Mattis says, well, here's the information. It says, this is what it is, this is what it is. You may not like him, but they do the fucking job, just like everybody else. And a good leader goes, all right, fine, got it. Now, in the event of a crisis that requires somebody to respond, you have terrible event happens. I need the military. Consult the military. Get them to do what they do. I can't see him doing that. I can see him tweeting out a response to what he's going to do without talking to anybody who actually knows anything. Because that is the thing. We keep hammering on this. He doesn't fucking know anything. He's literally stupid. I don't mean that he doesn't have intellect, whatever. That's not my point. My point is he has no idea how anything works. He has no interest in finding out how anything works. He has no interest in actually making anything work. He just wants to make a proclamation and have somebody else make it happen.
So this situation kind of reminds me of something that Steve Shives was talking about in one of his videos, which is Hanlon's razor. This is kind of a philosophical idea. It's never a tribute to malice, that which is adequately explained by stupidity. There's an attending sort of aphorism that goes, but at a certain point, stupidity is bad enough that it's indistinguishable from malice.
What it comes down to is, after a point, it doesn't matter if they're stupid or mean, if the result is the same.
Exactly.
If you still hurt people, it's fucking awful. It doesn't matter whether you didn't know any better because you're a fucking man-child, or you actually deliberately wanted to hurt somebody. It doesn't matter. The end result is the same.
The problem with stupidity as a character flaw is that it causes you to fuck up things that should not be able to be fucked up. And you just cannot account for how many different ways stupid can impact a whole lot of people unintentionally. This is where we're at in the administration, where he's throwing bombs this way and that, and he doesn't care and doesn't know who's going to get in the way, as long as he can perceive himself as somehow winning as a result, even though he rarely wins at anything since he's been president. I don't know if he's won anything.
Can't get enough Swing State in your life? Follow us on Twitter at swingstate_show. Like us on Facebook at facebook.com/swingstateshow. Check out back episodes, our blog, and whatever other things don't fit on the podcast at swingstateshow.wordpress.com. That includes links to past episodes and individual broadsides on YouTube. If you want to send us love notes or hate mail, shoot it to swingstateshow@gmail.com. Thanks to all of you who listen, share, and comment. We really appreciate it. Now, back to the show.
Speaking of stupid and or malicious, there was another staff change at the White House recently.
A guy named Anthony Scaramucci was installed as the White House communications director, and since he has arrived, it has just been a whirlwind of people leaving, firings. Priebus was pushed out. There has been a whole lot of front page news just because he's doing his job, quote unquote. Out of all this time that Luann and I have been watching this administration, I've been watching Trump for, it's going on 3 years now. This to me is the funniest fucking thing that I have seen in this entire time, and it's maybe even worth it that all this had to happen just so Scaramucci could come onto the scene, the stage of life, and play out his part however long it lasts, and I'm going to guess not very long. There was a piece that showed up in the New Yorker because Anthony Scaramucci decided to call one of the reporters and have an on-the-record conversation about, well, you'll see. On Wednesday night, I received a phone call from Anthony Scaramucci, the new White House communications director. He wasn't happy. Earlier in the night, I'd tweeted citing a, quote, senior White House official that Scaramucci was having dinner at the White House with President Trump, the First Lady, Sean Hannity, of course, and the Fox News executive Bill Shine, former Fox News executive Bill Shine. It was an interesting group and raised some questions. Was Trump getting strategic advice from Hannity? Was he considering hiring Shine? But Scaramucci had his own question for me. Who leaked that to you? He asked. I said he couldn't give him that information. He responded by threatening to fire the entire White House communications staff. What I'm going to do is, I will eliminate everyone in the comms team and we'll start over, he said. I laughed, not sure if he really believed that such a threat would convince a journalist to reveal a source. He continued to press me and complain about the staff he's inherited in his new job. I asked these guys not to leak anything, and they can't help themselves, he says. You're an American citizen. This is a major catastrophe for the American country. So I'm asking you, as an American patriot, to give me a sense of who leaked it. And he goes on and on and on, trying to find out who leaked that he was having dinner with Sean Hannity and Donald Trump. Is it an assistant to the president, he asked. I again told him I couldn't say. Okay, I'm gonna fire every one of them, and then you haven't protected anybody, so the entire place will be fired over the next 2 weeks. I asked him why it was so important for the dinner to be kept a secret. Surely, I said, it would become public at some point. I've asked people not to leak things for a period of time and give me a honeymoon period, he said. They won't do it. He was getting more and more worked up, and eventually convinced himself that Priebus was my source. They'll all be fired one by one. I fired one guy the other day. I have 3 to 4 more people I'll fire tomorrow. I'll get to the person who leaked that to you. Writes Priebus, if you want to leak something, he'll be asked to resign very shortly. Actually, he was. That part was true. I called the FBI and the Justice Department. Are you serious? I asked him. The swamp will not defeat him, he said, breaking into the third person. They're trying to resist me, but it's not going to work. I've done nothing wrong in my financial disclosures, so they're going to have to go fuck themselves. Scaramucci also told me that, unlike other senior officials, he had no interest in media attention. I'm not Steve Bannon. I'm not trying to suck my own cock. I'm trying to build my own brand off the fucking strength of the president. I'm here to serve the country, Bannon declined to comment. So that's just a little taste of Antonio and his new communications director job.
Holy shit. When you first brought that to my attention, I was just fucking amazed. He sounds like a dude who got cut from The Sopranos. Like, oh no, this dude's too over the top. That's not going to work.
What do you suppose the over-under is on whether or not he was doing blow shortly before that conversation? Yeah, I'm going to call the New Yorker. Fucking, they're not going to get the best of the mooch. Yeah, give me the phone.
The thing about this guy, he's exactly what you expect. A short-tempered, vindictive asshole is the official mouthpiece for Donald Trump. Why would this be a surprise? Actually, I'm surprised it took that long to get to somebody like him.
Well, if it helps, he came out of Goldman Sachs.
Of course he fucking did.
Then he went on to found some kind of an investment company.
So, money shuffling firm.
And a week or so ago, his wife left him because apparently she doesn't like Donald Trump too much.
Jesus Christ.
Guy's he's a poor guy. He's having a really rough time. He's got a new job, big responsibilities. New Yorkers out to get him.
Yeah, but he's going to have a new brand. That'll get him some checks.
Awesome.
I jokingly segued into this with vindictive and stupid, but he really does seem like the ideal mouthpiece for Donald Trump. His response to the leaker is to fire everybody. That's his plan. Burn it all to the ground.
Because Trump is, so successful at replacing and finding staff for all of these positions he needs to fill. This is a great time. You can really afford at this juncture to lose the personnel. Good move, Antonio.
We talked way back at the beginning about the literally thousands of positions that it was Donald Trump's responsibility to fill, most of which remain unfilled. He's basically filled his cabinet, and everybody else has basically just been like fucking balls in a bingo machine.
Yeah. Well, he's down to chief of staff. I mean, he's going to be replaced by, I think it's General Kelly. And he's also trying to nudge Jeff Sessions towards the cliff, in case you haven't been following that news lately. Citing the fact that Jeff Sessions recused himself, Donald Trump went on a couple of different tweet storms and public appearances where he basically implied that it would be best if Jeff Sessions was no longer the Attorney General. This was potentially a part of some scheme that he could get rid of him and then appoint a recess appointment so he wouldn't have to go through the Senate to get him confirmed. The Senate, of course, put the kibosh on that. But, you know, the fact that he's trying it and once again openly obstructing justice. And it's like we're at the point in this administration where openly obstructing justice and trying to fire your own Attorney General for not being able to protect you from the Russia thing that you got yourself into, that is just seen as like, oh, okay, no big deal. No problem.
That's just Trump. What do you expect? But again, to go back to what you were talking about with Sessions, his problem with Sessions is that Sessions recused himself from a case, which is what a good attorney would do.
You'd think there's some legal obligation at a certain point. You know, you're potentially a subject of the investigation. Obviously, you can't oversee the investigation. But in Trump's head, it's, oh, wait a minute, I hired the Attorney General. His job is to protect me. Everybody that works for me is supposed to be loyal to me. I have to say this because this is something I don't understand why it isn't said every day from every rooftop. The job of the people in Congress and the White House and the Supreme Court, wherever else, anybody in government, their oath is to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States, the law. It's not to defend a person who appears to love breaking it. This is what I learned in government, right? In government class in high school.
One of the things that you'll find, weirdly enough, this ties back into the military. The military oath requires an oath to the Constitution. Not to the president, not to the Congress, not to whomever. And in both cases, with the military and government service, particularly in the House and the Senate and the presidency, is to represent the people. The people, collectively. That means all of them, even the shitty ones you don't like. The government does not serve to service the president. And if anything at all makes it clear that Trump is not suitable for his position, it's that that's what he thinks is supposed to happen. Now, whether he doesn't know any better or is just an asshole with an emperor complex doesn't matter. This goes back to stupid and malicious. End result doesn't matter. He thinks, first of all, that it's his government now, but he thinks his government is supposed to do things for him, not us. Bad decisions aside, stupid tweets aside, the fact that he literally thinks that he is the reason the government is supposed to exist, to service him, is all that you should need to go, yeah, he's got to fucking go.
Or the fact that he tried to start a patronage relationship with James Comey. A president personally overseeing cases and deciding which ones go forward and which ones don't. That's insane. This is the same thing as his love for people like Vladimir Putin and Duterte, tin pot dictators who think that the government is just an extension of their own personal power and that anyone who attempts to get in the way is an enemy of that. This is so fundamentally anti-American, and that's a word that I'm loath to use because it's a little Orwellian. But no, seriously though, the entire idea of this country is exactly the opposite of what Donald Trump thinks it is. And we've known for years and years now that there is no reason he should have ever been elected president. But now that he is president, nothing has changed. So it's not like he got to the, I mean, and remember, this was the song you were all sold, Trump voter, that, oh, this is just for the primary. He's not really going to be like this. Oh, it's just for the campaign. Once he's actually the president, he'll shape up and start to act sensibly. Well, it hasn't happened. And everything that has happened just reveals another layer of darkness that we didn't know about before.
Which is sort of insane considering how shallow he ultimately is. That there are that many layers to him. While we're on the topic, as we often are, of Donald Trump's failures, the healthcare bill before the Senate didn't pass again.
Thank you, John McCain. I was beginning to doubt. I was watching the vote. I didn't stay up quite for the vote. But it looked like McCain was maybe just giving a speech to give a speech, but he actually came in and did the maverick move. I was impressed.
Well, yeah, considering he essentially fainted with, yeah, I'll go ahead and vote for it, coming back in.
I guess I get his logic because what he did was a procedural vote to start debate, which is something that in the Senate even if you were going to vote something down, of course, we can debate the issue before we vote it down.
We should fucking debate it.
Yeah, right. No, but I mean, we're talking about Trump and the erosion of democracy there. Mitch McConnell's, to me, just as responsible, and Paul Ryan as well for, completely corrupting the Senate and the House. But anyway, that's another day. Trump has handed yet another failure, as he was literally cheerleading on Twitter the same night.
But the thing is, though, a defeat like that doesn't happen unless we, the people they're supposed to represent, keep hammering at them. Because there's no shortage of representation in the government, in the Senate, particularly right now, who give zero fucks what we have to say. I can guarantee you that my senators, Grassley and Ernst, give zero fucks about what I say.
They voted for the skinny repeal. Remember that, Iowans.
They have voted for everything
Yeah.
that I have asked them and begged them not to vote for. Every single fucking thing. Because they know there's plenty of others who can be on the fence. I can't stop telling them you have to do shit differently. You can't stop telling your senators and representatives they have to do shit differently. We got a long time till Trump's term is up, okay? Regardless of whether he finishes it out, or Pence finishes it out, or we get all the way down to fucking Orrin Hatch. The term's going to get filled out by somebody. And we have to keep hammering on our senators and our representatives because they're all we've got.
Yeah, I don't know that I wouldn't put it past Mitch McConnell to try something again. I mean, it looks like I'm hoping that this defeat signals to the Republican Party that if we're going to pass any kind of major healthcare changes, we're going to have to do it together. And if that's the case, the way that single-payer Medicare for all coverage is polling right now, this may be our shot. I don't know if we could ever do it under a Republican administration, but certainly the time to beat the drum for that is now, and to keep that going into 2018 and into 2020, because I think that the Medicare for all fight, that could be a defining issue for the Democratic Party, which really needs a defining issue.
Oh, God, do they need a fucking defining issue right now.
And while it's depressing as all hell to me that we have to have the same conversation even after 2008 when we had more than a chance to do single payer, we didn't get there. The fight continues, and right now the opposition, by the skin of their teeth, failed to undo the biggest leap forward in healthcare that we've had in my lifetime. And I'm saying yours too, Luane, I would guess. Yeah. Yep. I mean, if it weren't for Obama, we wouldn't have jack diddly fixed in the private healthcare market, and the premiums would still be going up.
So I guess, as always, we just need to keep in mind that we need to organize, mobilize, protest,
vote.